Hey, everybody. You're at the Groove Don't Lie podcast, and I'm your host, Gerry Brown. On today's episode, number 1 of 2, we have as our guest the most incredible man talking about working with everybody, Tower Power, Billy Joel, Huey Lewis and the News, Hall & Oates, Jeff Beck, Bruce Springsteen, Paul Simon, Celine Dion, Mariah Carey, Willie Colon, Celia Cruz, his band along with his buddy Ozzy Melendez, Funk Filharmonik, and last but not least, he and I worked together with Diana Ross. So sit back, enjoy this first episode with John Scarpulla. How you doing, man?
Running, typical day in the life of John Scarpulla. It's just busy. I get home, I do a couple of gigs at home, get in my car, change my suit, change my instruments, suck on a couple of reeds, drive to a gig, come home, see my wife, have breakfast, say, gotta go, babe, drive to the airport. It's a beautiful life, and from all these years of doing this that it's not always as glamorous as people think, and sometimes it's more glamorous than even I can imagine. So,
Yes.
and everything in between. So,
when you mention that stuff, there really needs to be a documentary.
Yeah.
In the lives of musicians. They may talk about, the stars or whatever, but it's for us, and we are really blessed in what we do, and that we have that, I don't know, whatever you want to call that thing, but people enjoy being around us. We get the calls.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of this thing of, I've heard people say, so, if I study and all these things and blah, 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 so what will the conclusion be of that? And I said,
right.
Your payback is the callback.
Yeah, that's the truth, bro. Thankfully, and I say that to people all the time too, that it's, people are still calling, like I'm still getting the call. So I'm still getting the job done. I guess, people don't mind being around me.
What do you mean? What do you mean? People love you, man. I love you, man. Everybody loves John Scarpulla.
I'm a ball buster. I'm pretty much, like I have a reputation for being a ball breaker, and some people like the abuse, I guess. So.
You are the funniest ball breaker of ever.
Listen, if you told me I had to grow up, and I'm shaking my head no, just like you. This is what I do. I enjoy my life. If it's the one thing I can impart to my kids is, man, absolutely, whatever you choose doing, whether it's music or something else, it's like, enjoy what you're doing, have fun doing it, like just be joyful, and thankfully they're finding their way. They're finding their way. They're just trying to, find happiness. I suppose, it's probably what my parents wanted most, as much as they wanted me to, be in the family business and, stay home in New York and be around, not so much selfishly, but, they wanted me to be around. But they more importantly wanted me to go find my thing. That's, part of the American dream, I think, maybe, is, your parents they want you to evolve to that next place from where that, you know, they fought and battled to get where they were, and then they passed the torch to you, and then you gotta, like, you know, take that thing. I hope that my kids can, you know, kind of do the same thing, you know, find their way,
I
find that thing they dig. And of course, you know, I wanted them. I would have loved for them to both say, "Dad, I really want to go to school for music," but they're way smarter than me, so you know, they're choosing other paths. But music is in their lives, so you know, whatever, man. They're thankfully they're doing good. So
so and with this, with what you said about doing what we do,
yeah,
and the happiness around it, and the happiness that that we enjoy and that others feed off of.
yeah,
If for whatever jobs profession anyone is in, if 10 or 20% of the globe could do that,
Phew.
it'd be a different world.
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, like from your experience and your relationships with the, you know, all these musicians you've worked with over the years, like, you know, you're playing, you're listening, your eyes are closed, and you're listening to what's going on around you, and you know, you're finding your place in that thing. But then every now and then you open your eyes, and like, you know, I turn around and I look at you during the gig, and
Yeah.
you give me the nod.
Eh,
It's just like, you know, I mean, it's that other visual connection. I'm hearing you the whole night, but you know, there's that other, like, we make that other connection, and sometimes people see that, sometimes they don't. It's not about what people see at that point. It's like what I'm feeling inside, and it's hard to describe, and it's hard for, I think, for people to find that in maybe other walks of life. But it is part of the joy of what we, you know, what we get to do. Um, you know, that's the glamour. Not that, that's the wrong word, the wrong adjective, but that's just like one of the paybacks or the payoffs. You know,
yes.
for us, like, you know, I'm running, you know, getting in an Uber, going to the airport, flying to this thing, getting to the next thing, and then after a day and a half of getting to where I have to be, then I actually get to go make music, and that's the payoff. And yeah, this, you know, there's a direct deposit. It's not a check anymore. Now there's a, you know, eventually there's a direct deposit for all of those efforts. But you know, it's, you know, it's a beautiful thing, man, making that connection, and we get
Yep,
to
yep.
do it. We get to do it every day. Hopefully, we get to do it every day in all kinds of different places with
Yes.
different music, you know, and you know, so here we are.
I'm sure you started young, but I'm curious to know, were there musicians that you saw or songs that you heard that really kick-started you, and it's like, I'm really digging that.
You know, so I didn't really grow up in a musical household. I mean, my older brothers, they played. You know, my older brother Joe, my oldest brother played clarinet. That was pretty squeaky. That was not motivating at all. um, my brother Joseph played trumpet, and you know, like, I wanted to be like my older brother. Like, so it didn't matter what he did, whatever he did, I wanted to do. And at that point, I didn't come to any conclusions that I had any kind of musical, you know, any kind of connection to music. Um, but I had this elementary school teacher he was like this young guy, man. I remember him, like, he was like, you know, fresh out of college, uh, uh, you know, new teacher, and he made everybody go through like this whole testing process with rhythm and harmony and melodies, and you know, I didn't have an instrument yet. You know, like, he was the first person to kind of, you know, say, you know, this kid shows an aptitude. We should probably send a letter home to mom and dad. You know, my parents, they wouldn't have, you know, like, how would you see that in a kid if you don't, like, throw some things at him, you know? So my Uncle Lou, and this is, I remember, so my Uncle Lou was like, he was like an audiophile. He had the most amazing Macintosh, not Apple, but Macintosh, like, stereo system. So
Yes.
when we went to visit Aunt Marie and Uncle Lou, my Uncle Lou had like the album collection. And it was always Italian music, and I'm Italian American. You know, it was like always, you know, Jerry Vale and Mario Lanza and like all these crazy, you know, Sinatra and you know, the mainstay Italian singers, crooners, I guess. But he was way into the Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. And I remember hearing that stuff. And the album covers didn't hurt either because some of those Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, they were pretty like
with the
risque
whipped cream.
with the whipped cream. You know, like, they were pretty risque like album covers. And I just remember like sitting there with the album cover, listening to Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, and it was certainly an influence. I mean, did it, did it change how I play or the path that I followed? You know, like musically, not so much, but I remember that like really like connecting with that at some point. Like, this is kind of cool. Did I say like, oh man, I can't wait to play trumpet and play in a mariachi band or whatever? Like, I didn't really have that feeling, but I remember that like having that first connection, hearing that music. It was like kind of cool and groovy, and had like a thing to it. Now when I listen to it, some of it's kind of corny, but it still like brings me right back to that place. Like it was just like really beautiful, kind of pure stuff. That was probably the first stuff that I heard that I went like, wow, this is kind of cool. But I was like, I was really listening to saxophone players like right from the get go. And there were a couple of Italian saxophone players. Vito Musso was like this guy, that I really dug as a like early kind of R&B, like jazz guy coming out of the post bop thing. And who was the sax player with Keely Smith and
Oh, do, 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 do. I'm trying to remember that guy's name.
why am I forgetting his name? I'm sorry.
I'm just a gigolo.
Right. Who's
That,
that? Who's that?
uh,
Right.
we'll think of his name, but
Who's
anyway,
the sax player on Just a Gigolo? Sam Butera.
Sam Butera.
Sam Butera. So this is funny too. Like I remember my aunt, one of my aunts bought me like it was the like Disney. It was a collection of Disney songs, and it was like the music of Jungle Book, like that cartoon when I was a kid. And it was Sam Butera was playing sax on it, and he was the voice of Mowgli, or like I don't know.
Mowgli, yes,
He
yeah.
was like the voice of. But I remember like sitting and listening to that album, and it was like one of those first things. I mean, I was like a kid growing up in like white suburbia on Long Island, and my friends were not listening to that music. They were like, they were listening to some other stuff, and I was already like making that connection, I suppose, with sax players early on. I think the first sax player that really influenced me in any way, just hearing Cannonball Adderley, like hearing that sound and the happiness in the tone. And I put that on when I hear, other sax players make me smile and touch me in that way. But when you listen to Cannonball, you could hear him smiling, even if he's reaching and he's, maybe stretching and maybe not in the happiest place. There's just something so joyful about his sound and his tone,
Yes.
and just even the note choices and the melodies that he plays when he's improvising. And like, to me, one of the baddest alto players, and certainly one of the biggest influences for me
Yes, yes, yes,
as
yes.
a kid and as an adult. Like, and there's the others. Everybody talks about Charlie Parker and Sonny Stitt and like those guys, and I know Cannonball came out of that, but I connected more with Cannonball, maybe because it was a little more contemporary, a little more blues and R&B, like early R&B, all that boogaloo stuff that he did with his brother, with Nat Adderley.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's kind of the stuff that I really connected to as a kid. And it was, your friends were probably listening to, pop music, like the pop music of the day. They may not have been listening to, like, my friends were not listening to anything that I was listening to. And even in junior high school and high school, everybody was listening to, rock. They were listening, and I was not. I was listening to sax players. I was trying to transcribe Coltrane solos and, and Sonny Rollins solos and Sonny,
Yes.
like that's what I was doing. So I was,
Sonny Stitt, and how about I think I mentioned his name to you some years ago. Sal Nestico.
Oh, Sound Estico, man, like, total post bop. Yeah. And like it didn't matter what tempo.
Yeah,
But
tempo. What's up?
right,
I got no problems with that.
right. It didn't matter how fast that was going, man. The faster the better for that. Totally killing. So
Incredible.
like I didn't really I never really thought about like how that I think more than a piece of music or a specific player that may have influenced me to find my way to music. I think that like I had a couple of mentors at a very young age that
Right.
somehow like saw in me some kind of like some kind of musical aptitude. And I think that that's where it started. It might have just gone right by me had there not been like a musician, a teacher, an educator, somebody that said, wow, this kid actually shows some kind of an aptitude for music. We should really send a letter home to his parents. I remember going home with the letter, like, from my elementary school teacher, Tom Colabella, still a very good friend of mine. Um,
Great.
he would send me home. He sent me home with this letter, and there was the list of all the instruments, and like your son shows an aptitude. Not all the kids do. Every kid wanted to be a drummer, and that's no disrespect to you in any way. Every kid just wants to give me the sticks, and I
Yeah.
wanted to be a drummer too, man. And I remember
So
one of my older brothers, I think it was my brother Joe. He was like, "Look, man, and
look at
unless you get a gig, like unless you get like a big gig, you're going to be carrying that shit around with you the rest of your life, and you're going to be that guy with the hand truck and all the drums rolling into some gig, unless you get this great gig, and then you show up with your stick bag, because someone else is like setting up all your stuff." Um, Now that was it deterred me away from playing drums, but now here I am. So I'm a saxophone player, and I'm carrying all these saxophones to gigs. Like I got my tenor and my baritone on wheels and my alto, in a little rolling cart, and I'm rolling off to the gig with four saxophones. So the original concept of deterring me from having to carry stuff didn't. It worked to get me off the drums, but I'm always carrying a ton of stuff, just the way it is.
so when did you start playing with bands? And how soon, if you remember, when you were playing with these bands,
Yeah.
that you started getting the responses
Mm.
from either the band members or those who were witnessing your and listening to your playing? And are any of these band members still friends of yours,
Right.
or that you play with, or have played with?
You know, I mean, going to school, like public school, there were a bunch of opportunities to play,
Music
you know,
programs
yeah.
back in the day, man, that was, and wow.
That was like even one of the reasons like when we moved to Connecticut, it was really important to me that that there was going to be a good music and arts program, and the school district we chose really had a phenomenal music program. So I'm happy for my kids that they got to go through that, because I know in a lot of school districts in a lot of places they're kind of diminishing the emphasis on that part of most kids' educations. But there were a lot of opportunities in school to play, and the pit orchestras, jazz ensemble, wind ensemble, and then like a concert band setting. So and I was in every one of them. So it was like, you could only be in the one. No, I did every one of them. So like every musical opportunity there was, I was involved in it. And thankfully, again, I had like other teachers that saw something in me that always kind of pushed me to the top. So I was always like the younger kid playing with the older kids, because I was beyond like what the other kids my age were doing, and I was already kind of pushing for that, and kind of giving the older kids a little run for their money. Um, so I was in all those public school bands. But so that being said, my elementary school music teacher, he used to do a jam session on Friday nights, and it was at this piano player and composer's house. This guy's name is Randy Reeve. He passed away a couple of years ago, um, in like well into his 80s. This guy, for his whole life, like his whole philosophy on life was to share anything that he learned, like philosophically, or musically, just life lessons. He shared all of that with you, like all of that stuff. And he would have kids and adults come to his house every Friday night, and it was like 10 minutes from where I lived. So it wasn't like a stretch. Like my parents weren't like, you're not going over there, it's too far away. It was like, no, you need to go to this thing on Friday nights. And I was like one of the little kids. So they had the older kids, like three different groups, like those middle kids, some adults and the older kids, and then the really young kids. So I went in as like the really young kid. And right away it was like, I think we learned like C Jam blues and things ain't what they used to be. And, there would be like a couple other blues we would learn, like learning melodies and call and response. And um, I ate that stuff up, man. I loved it. There were some really great players there. Um, and
You got thrown right in.
I got
Well,
thrown in.
not well, even though you got thrown in, but you just calmly walked your ass right now. Okay, okay, here I am. Beautiful.
The cool thing about him too is so like there were concerts all the time that and they were like, we'd play at City Corps building in New York City, a lot of libraries, like public town concerts and stuff. And he would always have his trio, and then he would always have like some of the kids, so that he'd have some of the older kids might play back home in Indiana. They would play like a harder song, and then like the younger kids would come up again and like play C Jam blues or Things Ain't What They Used to Be or Four, or like something that was maybe a little more formulaic, like a distinct form that you could latch onto with not a lot of chord changes as a young kid. But he always included us, and I think that was where I started making the
That
band,
connection.
the connection with the other musicians, so the adult musicians, like, so on that musical level, but also on the intellectual level, like asking questions, asking the right questions, and probably a whole bunch of wrong questions, but kind of finding my way, and coming to some kind of realization that this was something that not only did I excel at, it was something that I kind of thrived in. Now I was very good friends with Randy Reeve, right till the end. And his whole thing was get an education, get a musical degree, study philosophy, study the great poets. Like he was a really deep character, and very influential for me. Like a lot of kids, and my younger brother Bobby, who spent a lot of time with him. Um, Pretty influential guy as a young man. He was like, don't do what I did, do these other things. This is what I know from my life. You know how you never listen to your elders? They like tell you not to do something, and then that usually makes you go do it. Like, don't do this because I did it and that was wrong. But you still, you go find your path. I think that's where I really started making the connection. I'm still really tight with a handful of those people that went through that. I mean, thankfully for me, through luck, time, talent, perseverance, all of those, like I've continued, and some of those people have gone by the wayside. Some of them are still maybe teaching, or went into composing and recording, like other avenues of the music business. But I'm still out there hoofing it, like, still kind of in the trenches sometimes. But I've stayed close with a good handful of those people, and some of those mentors that are actually still alive, which is a beautiful thing, and the families of some of those mentors that are not alive anymore. It's a much it, it's so much deeper than the music, as you know. You make that connection, musically, but then it becomes personal. And it's like I've remained in contact with a lot of those people over the years, and they're everywhere now. It's like my friends in LA, and my friends in Dallas, and my friends in Nashville, and my friends in Boise, Idaho, and then Connecticut and New York, and the deal.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
you've left a trail all over the world. Not in a bad way.
You've you've played with the Mariahs, you played with I think Willie Colon.
Yeah.
Uh, you played with all these icons. Is there any of those icons, yes, Tower Power, or Huey Lewis? Is there any one of those that really challenged you?
Wow. You know, um, I mean, different artists and different styles of music have challenged me along the way, I would imagine. Some things more than others. I think, so I know you're probably going to do a podcast with Ozzy at some point when Ozzy Melendez is
Yes.
available. And you know, we kind of came up together. We both grew up on Long Island. He went up to Berkeley. I ended up at Berkeley at some point. We really didn't know each other at Berkeley. We knew of each other, and when we both moved back to New York, that's when we really made that connection. And we were both pretty influential in turning each other on to work. So like if he got a gig and they needed a sax player, like, yep, you got to call John, you know, like, and vice versa. If I got a gig and they needed a trombone player, he's, you know, always my
Oh,
first,
awesome. Yeah.
and has remained my first call and my dear friend. And like, you know, so like, you know, if he got, you know, and it's all kinds of levels of gigs, from sessions to, you know, local work and club work, you know, in New York, and then, you know, the national and international acts. You know, he was an integral part of me, you know, hooking up with a lot of good stuff, including, and that's what leads me to just like starting to dabble in salsa and Latin music. And probably I was already playing with him with Willie Colon. And I was like the fourth trombone player. So it was like, you know, Willie picked up the bass, trumpet, and trombone, but there were two other trombone players. And it was when I started doing it was Luis Bonilla who came out with
Oh, yeah.
Dion
Wow.
and Ozzy, and then me. So I was playing like basically third or fourth trombone, but on tenor. And then there were a lot of solos. Any of the jazz solo stuff always ended up falling mainly on the tenor player, and then more of the salsa stuff, uh, you know, would always fall on the bone players. And then Willie had his signature, you know, like signature tunes, Idilio, like a couple of things that were just so specific to Willie. And that stuff was really challenging because now it isn't my culture. It wasn't my culture, and I didn't grow up listening to Latin music in that way, and trying to find the clave and trying to find the right clave and hearing the 2/3 and the 3/2 and the different permutations of those claves. And then when it comes time to improvise, to find your way through those claves so that you're not, you know, you're not crossing the clave, you're playing with the clave. And so that was really challenging. And so then the bongo player was Jorge. Oh man, I'm not going to remember his last name. He had a collection of like just the greatest collection of salsa, and he made me. I paid him like $100 or something. He made me a collection of like 20 CDs of all of like his most favorite stuff and all the classic salsa. And I ate that stuff up. And then I had a million questions after listening to it. Like I didn't know what, you know, like I don't speak Spanish, and I was learning to speak and learning to try to understand what I didn't even know what they were singing about, you know, but I was like listening to this music. Like that was probably the most challenging stuff for me because it was really outside of my culture, and I really had to work at it. I think, you know, for Ozzy, I think he worked at it, but I think it was more of a natural thing for him because he grew up in that culture. That was probably the most challenging stuff for me. Like it really kicked my ass. So then after doing Willie, like I was kind of in that scene, you know, like in New York, like getting called for other salsa bands and merengue bands. And Ozzy was doing this other band called Timbalaye. So it was Ralph Irisari. He's passed now too. But he had like this Latin jazz. It was like Irakere. It was like that Cuban. He was Puerto Rican, but it was the hardest music I've ever played. The hardest music, and like today, the hardest music I ever had to play. The hardest music I ever had to learn. The hardest stuff I ever had to memorize. The hardest stuff I ever had to improvise on. And man, Ralphie, he he would fire you up, man. Like he would, it was always a training ground on that gig. He would, when it came time for you to improvise, man, he was so hard on that shit, like just sticking it down your throat to make sure you're hearing the right clave. And if you weren't, man, he would take his sticks and put the sticks like this, like you're crossow. Oh, I forget what the word was, like you're playing against the clave, like work on it. And then he would go back to playing his shit to make sure your shit was right. That was the hardest gig I ever did in my life, was was Ralph Irisari and Timbalaye. And if you when you interview Ozzy, he's going to tell you the same thing. That gig his ass too. That was probably the toughest gig I ever played.
But I just want to say it's so beautiful to hear what you said. And Ron Powell,
Yeah,
yesterday, I did in a episode with him, and he said he talked about Sergio Mendes,
yeah,
and that Sergio really brought him in and had a couple guys who showed Ron not the American way of playing Brazilian
right,
music, but the real deal.
right. The Brazilian.
So with what you're saying, even though they may have been tough on you and stuff, but they saw that you had that capacity to make that happen. And
Yeah,
they just pulled you in and whatever these lessons, man, which are totally priceless. And credit to you that you said, hey man, and here's $100, man. Man, I need to know this, man. Can you make, the 20 CDs or whatever that I need to listen to
I'm just
get
looking
there,
up.
to get me there. That's
I'm,
beautiful, man.
I wish I could remember George's last name. It's Jorge Gonzalez.
Jorge Gonzalez.
He was such a badass. Anyway, he was, he helped me a lot just by giving me those CDs. I still have the CDs. Do you have a CD player anymore?
I do.
I don't. I have like 1,000 CDs. I can't listen to any of them because I don't even have a CD player anymore.
Well, I got one a couple of years ago because I started running. I found some CDs that I had in boxes, and it's like, oh shit, I don't even have a CD player, man.
Yeah,
I need to get something, so I did.
nice. I'll
So
have I'll bring my CDs over to your house.
that's great. So those are the people that challenged, probably you say the Willie Cologne in being in that formation.
Yeah, getting into that whole Latin, the Latin scene, definitely. That was the most challenging stuff for me.
So when so you have this ongoing relationship with Ozzy Melendez.
Yeah.
So when did the Funk Philharmonic,
Oh man.
when did that come into existence?
The band's been together 40 years, bro.
Wow.
I mean, so Lee Finkelstein is the drummer, and he's basically, I mean, he and Ozzy and a couple other guys really started the band 40 years ago. I was not in the band in the beginning. I was still living in Boston. Um, and I mean, Lee can tell you, he'll tell you the exact day, like the very first gig that I did, because he kept a log of all that stuff. Um, uh, I mean, they were already in existence when I came to like when I moved back to New York, when I moved back to Long Island. But when I was when I was at Berkeley, there was a Tower of Power cover band. There was like they had ensembles at Berkeley, so there was like the Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers ensemble. There was like a Stevie Wonder ensemble. There was a Tower of Power ensemble, and there were a whole bunch of other ones. Horace Silver. Uh, there were so many different ones that I did. There was like a Sanborn group. And but I remember auditioning for the Tower of Power ensemble. It was led by one of the teachers there, another like young cat composer, recording guy who played trombone. He didn't play in the band. No, he led the. Well, maybe he played. I don't remember now. Um, but I auditioned and ended up being the tenor player in the Tower of Power ensemble at Berkeley. So that was like my first. I mean, I was already listening to Tower of Power, but I wasn't. I hadn't really like studied the music or been in a band that played the music. But that was where I got my first taste of it. But when I moved back to New York, so I graduated from Berkeley. I stayed up there for a couple extra years, and when I moved back to Long Island, a buddy of mine it's like kept telling me about this, Funk Philharmonic, and I was only home for like, I don't know, I was home for like a couple of months. I was probably living at my parents, but I don't remember. I went to visit. I just went to visit my one of my brothers, and I drove by this club, and there was a big sign out that said 12-piece funk band tonight, Funk Philharmonic, and it was around. Was it? No, it wasn't. It wasn't Thanksgiving. I don't remember the exact uh, reason, but I just remember I went to my brother's, hung out with the family a little bit, said hello, and I'm like, I'm going to see this band tonight, going to see the Funk Philharmonic. Um, and it was like it was some weird club called Dining Car 1890. It was like a bunch of old Long Island Railroad trains that they put them all together and they made like a restaurant club out of it. It was weird, kind of weird place. Not a place you would expect to see a band, and certainly not the Funk Philharmonic. Um, but I went and I listened, and I just remember I went up to one of the sax players and I just gave him my card because, like, who knew that I was home? Nobody knew I had moved back to New York. And I was like, if you guys need anybody, let me know. I just finished playing in a Tower Power band at Berkeley, and whatever. I didn't really think much of it. Just kind of met some of the guys, socialized a little bit. I still didn't really know Ozzy and some of the other guys and Lee. Like, I really didn't meet the guys. And maybe
Hmm.
like 2 weeks later, they had another gig, and one of the sax players didn't show up. And so I got a phone call from the bass player in the band. He's like, "We got your card here. Can you come down to the club now? We're doing a sound check." I'm like, "Oh shit!" So it was like some club in Huntington on Long Island, called New York Avenue. That was the name of the club. It was actually on New York Avenue in Huntington. I went down. They needed a bari player, so I went down with my baritone. We sound checked, maybe played 3 or 4 songs, and I was whatever. I was prepared, and I could read charts, and I had just finished doing all this shit at Berkeley, so I was on, pretty much on top of it.
Easy peasy.
They literally said to me, like, right after the soundtrack, "You want to be in the band?" It was like
You
that.
got it. You
That's how
got
I
it.
got to get. I was Rich Edler. It was the bass player, he's not even in the band anymore. And I don't remember why he was the one. I have to ask Lee about this, but he was the one who came to me. He's the one who called me, and then he's the one who said, "You want to be in the band?" So I don't know what happened with the other sax player. I think he was kind of flaking. Didn't want to. He wanted to play jazz. He didn't really want to play in this funk band, and it just worked out for me. It was like the timing was right. Had I not showed up at that club and gave out my card, they wouldn't have known me. They would have called somebody else. Like, so it was, a little bit of socializing, little networking, and then I had the goods. So, went and played. And so, like, that was, 37 years ago or something. I think I've been in the band for 37 years, bro. So we're going on 40. There are most of the original members. There's been a couple of changes. Unfortunately, one of our, actually two of our singers passed away, but the original singer, Timmy Lawless, passed away. I don't know, probably like 5 or 6 years ago now. I mean, we're getting older, so we're seeing our mentors, our idols go, but we're also now, seeing our peers. Some of our peers are kind of dropping. And that's a tough one. But here, man, the band is like, still banging, still going strong. 5-piece horn section. Tommy Bowes singing lead. Tommy was with Tower Power for like 12 years. Brent Carter is the other singer. He was with Tower when I was in Tower Power, and the two of them just tear it up. The two of them together. It's Brent wasn't in the band originally. Tommy wasn't in the band originally, but they both been in and out of the band for the longest now. And of course, Ozzy fronts the band, does most of the talking and announcing of the tunes, and introducing the band, and the whole thing. So it's been a really sweet gig. I can tell you this. So, like, again, I moved to New York. Nobody really knew who I was. I moved away when I was 17 to go to college. Went to Boston. Like, when the minute I was in the Funk Philharmonic, it was like I arrived. I arrived in New York. I arrived on Long Island. Every musician that I knew and anybody that was worth anything came out to see the Funk Philharmonic. And we played once a month at the Brokerage, this comedy club. We packed the place. And then we did once a month at La Barbad in the city on 57th Street. So we had like these two gigs. So we had like a city gig that we would rock the club, and we had this Long Island gig that we did, think we did that. We probably played in that club for 25 years, like every last Thursday of every single month. And the place was jam packed. It didn't matter if there was a blizzard, if it was raining, if it was 1,000 degrees out, that place was packed. And it just, from that, everybody they knew everybody in the band. Like everybody, it was like, so from that, all the other work fell into place. Like people were calling me for all kinds of other gigs and sessions and recommendations, and can you contract my thing, and can you get a horn section for this, and can you come out on the road with us for this, and then Ozzy would get a call for something, and then he'd call me for his thing, and it was like this giant snowball, networking thing, and I would say that a lot of it came from the Funk Philharmonic. There are a handful of Tower Power cover bands out there, but I'd like to think that the Funk Philharmonic has been the long-standing one, being that we've been doing it for 40 years. And the guys in Tower, Emilio and Doc, and those guys in Tower, they were well aware of the Funk Philharmonic. There's been a handful of guys in the Funk Philharmonic that were also affiliated in some way with Tower Power, including Tommy Bose and Brent Carter. Ozzy, before I had the gig with Tower, Ozzy co-wrote one of the songs on what album is it? It's the album before Rhythm and Business. But I think he co-wrote one song with Barry Danielian, with the trumpet player. And I think he went out to LA for the sessions and everything. And then shortly after that, I ended up getting the call with Tower. And it's a whole funny story too. But they knew we were doing this stuff, and they knew we were playing this music, and obviously knew that I can play this music. I think that they were auditioning sax players. They were trying guys out as they were, in their travels. Dave Mann was the sax player in Tower before me, and when he was ready to leave, he gave me a call. Hey man, I'm thinking about leaving the band. And would you be interested in doing the gig? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And then I didn't hear from them for a bit. He hadn't left yet. He hadn't given his notice yet. And then when he gave his notice, I guess he threw my name in the hat. Barry Danielian was the trumpet player. I think he probably seconded it. Like, yeah, you should probably give this guy a call. And they did. But this whole story, and I've told this story on a couple other times, but like I'm at home in my house and I get a phone call, and I don't know Emilio Castillo. I know who he is. He's the leader of Tower Power, and songwriter with Doc Kupka. And it's like, hi, John Scarpulla. And I'm like, yeah. He goes, this is Emilio Castillo from Tower Power. And I'm like, ha ha ha. Hang up the phone. I had this friend that would call me all the time, man. And he would make believe he was David Clayton Thomas from Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And, hey, I'm calling you about a gig. And he was always making believe he was somebody. And he would call me, like jokingly. And so I thought it was my friend Sean, like, punking me, calling me and telling me. And so like, I was like, oh yeah, sure. Hung up the phone, and the phone rings again, pick up the phone. And he's like, John, don't hang up. This is Emilio Castillo from Tower of Power. Like, it was like the second time. And I'm like, backpedaling. I'm like, oh man, I'm so sorry. I hung up the phone on you. Like, I was like, trying to get through and he's like, John, calm down. He's like, calm down. Listen, man, I'm calling you, whatever. Your name came up, and, would you be interested? Send me your demo. Now, I had just made this like compilation demo. I have one that's like 3 minutes long, and then I have an elongated one that's like 7 minutes. But I sent him my demo, and he was like, bro, he's like, I'm not even joking. That's the slickest demo that anybody's ever sent me. Like he was like, he was just like, it's so badass. We want you to come out. He was like, that was it. So like, he heard the demo, he heard I can play, he heard I could improvise. And then, thankfully the stars aligned, and I had enough guys kind of backing me up in my corner, like, saying, yeah, this is the guy. So
Divine intervention,
right.
divine timing, man. Yeah.
That's how it happened, bro. But that story, and I, again, I've kind of told this story too, but I didn't want to go out and, like the band is here, they play and all this material. I didn't want to go out and have a music stand in front of me, like trying to play the music, and then kind of work through it. So like I forget how much time I had. It wasn't a lot of time, less than a month, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. I memorized I memorized the book. I sat there with my little 4-track cassette player with like live board tapes of the band, and I just for hours, bro, I would just sit and run them and run them and run them, and like just I just kept playing over them and then visualizing it in my head. I could see the chart, I could see the line, I knew what the rhythm was. I listened to the songs enough; they were just in me. I memorized the whole book, and I went out for the first sound check. And Emilio's like, "Bring him a music stand," and I'm like, "No, I don't need a stand." He's
Yeah.
like, "But you, I'm like, "I don't need it." And then he's like, "All right, so you memorized the book? Yeah. Okay, let's do Soul with a capital S." And Soul with a capital S had a couple of key changes, went through a bunch of stuff, and it was. I remember that chart being a long one. You can't see my arms, but it was a long chart. I don't know, it was like 4 or 5 pages long, and we played that down. And he's like, "Whoa, okay, Soul Vaccination. You got to Funkifies." Like we did like maybe 3 songs. Goes, "Did you memorize the whole book?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And he's like, "Okay, guys, dinner. Sound check's over." And it was like all the guys, they all came over to me like one at a time. Like everybody came over and just patted me on the back. Like no one's ever done that. No one's ever come out and just memorized the shit or didn't have their little, didn't have their notes or whatever it was. He's like,
Totally prepared.
like I just went in prepared. We had to learn other stuff, and they did some things differently even in that time period where they had some changes to like forms of stuff, and we still had to work through, like, because we did squib cakes every night, and each soloist kind of made his own solo, like this is what I want to do during my solo, so that each solo would be a little different than the next. So they were still doing the Dave Mann's chord changes, and I just had to kind of come up with my own thing, which kind of, I just changed what Dave's solo was to something that I did, that I wanted to do. But other than that, man, it was like, trial by fire, played the book, and that was it. We sat and we had dinner, and then that was where the gigs. And I remember Emilio, it's like after that first run, he's like, "Oh, we're going to Europe in 3 weeks. You want to be in the band?" And I was like, "Yes, sir." Shook his hand. We gave each other a hug. He's like, "See you in 3 weeks."
I hope you enjoyed this first episode with the one and only John Scarpulla. We thank John for this. Incredible. So we hope to see you for episode number 2. Until then, keep that groove alive. You know why? Because groove don't lie.